You know what? I wasn't going to talk about this topic because I don't want this channel to get yeeted. I've put a lot of work into this YouTube channel, even though, it's not very big, but I've got a lot of time spent on it, and I don't want to be a BitChute only kind of person. I've already had one video removed talking about the topic that shall not be named, and that is the 2020 selection of the POTUS. Hopefully I said words that are too abstract for the algorithm to pick up on. But you, the listener, should know what I'm talking about now, and you should be able to tell probably from the thumbnail too. For those of you who are not aware, Tucker Carlson did a segment opening his show last night about Fulton County, Georgia, that I cannot get probably too specific about. But you know what? I think the way that I'll phrase this so that YouTube does not kick me off. What Tucker's segment last night showed, if you were to accept what he reported as fact, those of us who dismissed all the stuff about Dominion and voting machines and hackers and the machines had some algorithm that they were adding and subtracting votes over. Those of us who said that was nonsense, we seem to be vindicated, not just because all the Dominion stuff didn't pan out, but because the stuff that we're actually getting, now that we're getting further from the event that happened in fall of last year. I won't get more specific than that. Now that we're getting further from that, we're starting to get more details. The truth is starting to come out as we always knew it would. And it looks like the real issues with that whole process were more to do with how the pieces of paper that people filled out. I'll try and be coy here. I won't get more specific than that. You know what sort of pieces of paper I'm talking about. Those pieces of paper were not securely handled in many jurisdictions across this country. There was not clear chain of custody. This was a phrase that those of us who are sort of in the anti-Dominion realm harped on quite a bit. It's not that there was some centralized plan that was being executed, by writing into the code of the voting machines some dastardly algorithm that would manipulate the results of the election. No, what is more likely to have happened, where the more likely source of any errors, put it that way, let's say, those probably were the result of overly lax standards, overly lax security when it came to how ballots were issued and collected. Jurisdictions across this country were very cavalier about how they handed out ballots, on the one hand, and two, how they collected those ballots. In Nevada, for example, there were many reports about just ballots being strewn across the street because everyone got mailed a ballot and they were just, they were flying around in the wind. They were littered everywhere. And any person really could pick up one of those ballots. And, if there wasn't a secure enough collection process, well, they could fill that out, write in whatever they wanted, and turn it in. And that's why the chain of custody is so important when it comes to elections. And Fulton County, now it appears, is unable to provide any documentation regarding the chain of custody for about 5,000 of these pieces of paper. I mistakenly named them for what they are. Hopefully YouTube didn't pick up on that. But remember, the counties in Georgia are extremely small. This is just one of many counties that make up, the city of Atlanta. And the gap, the spread between the two candidates in Georgia was only about 13,000 votes, I believe. So this number 5,000, if there were 3 counties that had the same, level of error, let's say, and there's no clear chain of custody, that would bring certain results. I won't say what, but it'll bring something into question. I won't say what it brings into question. Certainly doesn't bring the election into question. Here's a disclaimer before I go forward. Joe Biden was the most duly elected president in American history. He's the most popular president in American history. And there has never been a more secure election than the election of 2020. There, I said it. Now, with that disclaimer out of the way, back to reality. These 5,000 ballots, just because there's no clear chain of custody, does not mean that these ballots are malicious in nature. I'm not saying that somebody just printed up these ballots and threw them into the pile. I'm not saying that. That's not necessarily true. But when you don't have a clear chain of custody, there's no guarantee that that didn't happen. That's why having these lax standards that were instituted in the name of trying to prevent the spread of the virus last year drew so much scrutiny from folks like Richard Barris, who I was listening to at the time before the election, trying to learn about the polls and stuff. That's why I listened to his show. But him, and he brought on Robert Barnes to talk about, hey, there's some serious problems with the way this election is being conducted. And so unlike I think most of the country, I was anticipating there being issues come election night because they were talking about the ways in which certain states and certain counties were going about changing the way that they conducted their elections. And in doing so, made it possible for individuals, no one in particular, but individuals, to do unsavory things with ballots that weren't necessarily theirs. I'll put it that way. It created the opportunity for there to be some... Okay, I'll put it this way. Created the opportunity for some unqualified votes to be mixed in with the legitimate and qualified and legal votes, and it made it impossible to distinguish between the two, put it that way. And so therefore, the only real check that you had on any of these ballots that you could go back and look to and say, gee, were there any issues that need to be addressed here, would be by looking at the signatures on the ballots and to verify that they match the signature in the voter file. Because you want to make sure that the person who signed their name to that ballot was actually the person who that ballot was assigned to. That's your last line of defense if there is no clear chain of custody. Because if you don't have a clear chain of custody, that okay, the ballot went from the possession of the voter, of the confirmed person who was, the voter, to the local precinct, to, the county, to whoever. If you don't know who controlled it along all those steps, there's no guarantee that the person who filled out that ballot was the voter themselves. That's really the crux of the issue here that I hope at some point will be addressed. We're getting there. We're moving along that road, and it's to me it's represents tremendous progress that even the Georgia Secretary of State now, who was the most intransigent gaslighter on the topic of the election. I won't get into detail about the things that he said back then, but if you wanted to look at some of my old videos, I think most of them are still up. They've made it through the YouTube filter, but I can remember specifically at least one was taken down on that topic. Of course, they all should still exist on BitChute, though. Thank goodness for that. But now, if we have even Brad Raffensperger calling out the malfeasance of Fulton County officials, that means that sort of the jig is up at this point. He's not defending those people. He's trying to throw them under the bus. And that's a good sign, because it shows that Raffensperger's afraid. He feels like he can't, he needs to find a scapegoat, or else he's going to be the one taking the blame, which, he should take the blame. He's the Secretary of State. This is his job, to run the elections. And so I hope this doesn't stop at Fulton County. What went on in Fulton County went on in jurisdictions across this country, and not just in contested states. It went on everywhere. Not literally every single county, but lots of different places that were not necessarily contested, because the rules were relaxed all over the country. It made these sorts of irregularities possible. It's just that in a lot of the parts of the country, they skew so far to one direction or the other, either in the red direction or the blue direction, that this potential malfeasance did not end up making a difference in the final outcome anyway. And, something else I'll bring up is that, you have a state like Florida here, where back in 2018, Brenda Snipes, who was the supervisor of elections for Broward County, what enraged people and what, ultimately led to her being fired by the governor after he was elected, was that on election night in 2018, we saw issues here with the chain of custody, to where ballots were being loaded and unloaded from private vehicles that were not, owned by or leased by the Broward County Supervisor of Elections, that were carrying ballots. And it looked like these were illegitimate ballots that were being carried in order to sway that race back in 2018. We all recognized it. That wasn't a partisan thing back then. It was, you had folks on the left, the guy who was running in the primary against Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and you had Republicans, even as mainstream as Marco Rubio, guys who are not firebrands when it comes to election integrity. There was a broad consensus that this sort of thing should not be tolerated, and that we need a strict chain of custody when it comes to ballots in this country. We do not want to live in a system, if we're supposedly governed based on these elections, we don't want there to be the possibility that at any moment some individual could just pull up to the building where the ballots are being counted and unload a bunch of ballots out of the back of their car from who knows where, and go and have them counted the same as your vote. And so this is something that, in Florida, it's not a problem here anymore. And I think our results reflect that. It'll be interesting to see what the 2022 election is like here in Florida. Because Broward and Palm Beach County, they've made getting rid of their issues made a big difference in our election here. And so if you do the same thing in states across this country, and you root out all of the corrupt elections officials who act in ways akin to Brenda Snipes, then, and only then, will you perhaps be able to restore some confidence in the U.S. electoral system. Because as of right now, there is a severe lack of confidence in our election system. And I say this as someone who's not a fan of the established American state. I don't think that it's something that will be salvageable and that we can reform through elections. But what I'm saying is that if the statesmen in our country, if there are any left, if there are people who just care about the system and the institutions and want to preserve the integrity of the United States, this is something that you need to address, because just ignoring it is going to do much more to benefit people like me, who are not fans of the system, than it will people like you who seek to perpetuate it. If you want to perpetuate it, you need to keep it from. You need to prevent this collapse of confidence. And you can't just beat people into submission and tell them that they're racists if they question you. If you have to do that, if there's overwhelming skepticism for your position, and your only recourse is ridicule, well, you're not doing very well. And that, but it might be okay. It might work well enough in run-of-the-mill, ordinary partisan politics, everyday sort of issues. It might be okay if you can just, if you can get, let's say 55% of the electorate to agree with you, and then you just call the 45% who don't agree with you evil Nazis, you might be able to get away with that. But when you're talking about the system, the legitimacy of the system itself, when you're talking about the nature of our government, you can't just have 55% of the electorate who considers the system to be legitimate. You need a super duper majority of, 85% plus of the people who agree to play by these rules. And if the percentage of people who believe that the game is rigged reaches a critical mass, what you're going to end up with is a large contingent of people who believe that the only way to win is to not play the game. And, don't rule that out. That is a tactic used in a lot of countries around the world when they want to delegitimize or argue against the legitimacy of the electoral process. People say, we're going to boycott the election because the elections don't mean anything anyway. And then what ends up happening is the incumbent gets 95% plus of the vote because all the people who oppose him refuse to vote. And then people go, see, you won 95% of the vote. You rigged the election. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Once people believe that the electoral system is not fair, it will then only gain the appearance of being more unfair. And so I'm trying to give advice to people who care about the system. I don't. Frankly, I'd be happy if people continue to doubt the system. I think it's unhealthy that people think that politicians have their best interests at heart, and that when politicians do things, it's somehow, when politicians hurt the people of a country, you shouldn't believe that the people are hurting themselves. That's not true. This sick idea that, we pick our leaders, so when our leaders, crack the whip and scar us on our backs, we're doing that to ourselves. It's absolute nonsense, and I hope that I was able to balance being censoring myself enough for YouTube, but getting around the restrictions in a way to where I could still get my point across. I know that this might be annoying to listen to because the way that I dance around things, but hopefully I got my point across, and this will be able to stay up, because I do care that this does stick up, because what does it matter if I come out and I sound real fiery, and after a week the video gets deleted? I want these things to be here for posterity, so the people years down the road can hear, like a time capsule, essentially. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.